Great. So I think let's make a bit of a start. So one of the things that obviously, let me introduce myself in a second. But I'd just be interested about who's kind of done detached youth work, who's not, who this is new to. A few shake of the head. So just either unmute and say yes, no, a bit, or stick it in the chat about where you're at, kind of with it. So
Not done any.
Not done any. Great, Becky. It's great to have you with us then to explore what it could be like. So very good. Anybody else had a go at detached youth work before? Yeah, you've had a go. Brilliant. Brilliant. Okay, cool. So let me introduce myself then. So my name's pretty into detached youth work, but feel God is calling you in that direction. Excellent. Excellent. Well, hopefully this workshop then will be really helpful in helping you think about how to get started, because that's part of what we're going to do. So just to quickly introduce myself. So my name's Tim Evans. I have been doing full-time youth work since 1993. So that's a long, I feel really old. But I actually started because we've got someone here from Swansea. I became a Christian when I was at university and started volunteering with, because I'm called Student Community Action there. And detached youth work was the very first thing that I did. So taking a van up onto the estates around Swansea, seeking to meet local young people. That whole naive student Christian thing of, you feel like you can change the world, right? And you just go out and do it, and then realise it's actually quite challenging. So that got me going in terms of youth work. So I worked for a YMCA for 5 years, working with young people in the care and justice system and young people at risk of homelessness. I then worked for Youth for Christ for 4 years in Birmingham, which is where I live now, as their Birmingham director, helping churches engage with young people in their communities. And then for the last 19 years, I think it's 19 years, I have been chief executive of an organisation called Worth Unlimited, which is a Christian organisation that helps Christians engage with young people who are on the margins, vulnerable, at risk, with a variety of different projects kind of around the country. And then the other part I do, which is interesting hearing Chris earlier, is that for 19 years, my wife and I have been foster carers. So my wonderful messy office you see behind me, if the door opens, it'll be one of 6 children and young people, 2 of which are my own, 4 of which are fostered, that may come barging in the room. For some obscure reason, the snack tin is in my office. I don't know why. It's not very good for me and my waistline, but if they want snacks, that's where they come to. So there we go. So that's a little bit about me. I live on an estate in the east part of Birmingham, so kind of live in a neighbourhood kind of intentionally, as well as part of all of that. And I've done some qualifications and stuff along the way. But this needs not to be about me. It's just a way of introducing myself to you. Please don't treat me as some kind of expert. I'm here to facilitate a bit of a conversation. Obviously, I've done a fair amount over the years, but this is a chance for us to kind of learn and grow and think a bit together. So do stick stuff in the chat. If you've got a query, a question, a point of view, do that. Don't feel you've got to kind of hold it. I'll respond. I've got the chat box open in front of me, so I'll respond to it, as you jump in, as you do that. And then let's give it a bit of a go, if that's all right. So here's what we're going to attempt to do in this session. So we're going to think a little bit about, well, what actually is detached youth work? What is it? What are some of the benefits of doing detached youth work? What are some of the challenges? And you might have come to this workshop with some excitement around the possibilities and some fears around what it might actually involve. And so that's, be honest about those things. Like I say, stick that stuff in the chat. Unmute and talk to me about it, because especially if you're new to it, that's really important. We're going to think about how to get started, including some very practical things that you need to think about in order to start detached youth work. Going to think a little bit about how we develop the relationships through detached youth work, what it means to get to know young people and to build relationships with them and all that kind of stuff. And then we're going to finish with what are some of the skills and qualities that I need to bring and my team potentially needs to bring to all of that. Does that sound all right? Does that sound okay as something to do till 12 o'clock? I think we've got until it's a strict time frame because they will kick us out at 12. I think that's how it works. So we've got until then. So good. If that sounds all right to everybody, then let's bat on with that thinking. So tell me first of all what this might be teaching my grandmother to suck eggs, but what is detached youth work? What is it? So either speak or put it in the chat. But what do you think detached youth work is? What's involved with it?
My understanding is that it's meeting the children where they are, not expecting them to come to you.
Yeah. Yeah. So connecting with young people where they hang out together, spend time together, wherever that might be. So, yeah. What are the kind of places do you think? Do we think young people hang out in? Where might some of those spaces be?
Parks.
Parks. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Anywhere else where you live? Costa. Yeah. Coffee shops. Yeah.
Street corners.
Street corners. Yeah.
Always used to be outside the supermarkets when I was younger.
Yeah. Supermarkets. Yeah, absolutely. Supermarkets, shopping malls, parks, bus stops is a favourite if the weather's a bit dodgy. Sometimes some forward-thinking local authorities will put shelters into parks and that kind of stuff, but not everybody kind of thinks like that. Other places might be Mugas, so multi-use games areas, skateboard parks, local park, like I say, someone said the local park, whether that's a playground or a wide open kind of green space. Yeah, so you've got the basic gist, right? So that it's about engaging with young people where they do what we call associational life. So where young people associate kind of together. Good. So it'd be interesting what you think youth work in general kind of is for. I'm a big fan of this idea that youth work is about informal education. So it's what do you learn about life, yourself, the world, outside of school, outside of those formal education systems that teach you how to write, how to count, etc., etc., etc. Those other things that you need to learn about yourself, life, the world, and in a Christian context, how you begin to explore thinking about God and how God plays a part in the world and in your life and all that kind of stuff. So detached youth work is about delivering informal spiritual and social kind of education. So it's not just an activity, do you know what I mean, that you do. So I'm just going to move. I'm just trying to move my screen. There we go. That's better. So it's one of these things to do in PowerPoints is people like the boxes pop up like all over your screen, and then suddenly you can't see whatever you're doing. The second thing about detached youth work is that it responds to whatever the needs and opportunities are. So it's a very reflexive piece of youth work. So you might be used to doing youth work, which is where you've got a pre-planned set of activities perhaps that you're doing, or a pre-planned curriculum even, where you're wanting the young people to explore this, that, or the other. You set out what that activity is and what the purpose of that activity is. The thing about detached youth work is that you are being responsive to whatever's going on with those young people in those particular contexts at that particular time. So you're responding to needs and opportunities. So it's a very flexible, responsive kind of way of doing youth work, which suits some people and less suits other people. Some people really like their curriculum planning and, this is the session we're going to do and are going to mark it all out. When you wander up to a group of young people hanging out in the park, you can't quite do it in that way. And so for some people, that's really exciting. For some people, that's really scary, and everything in between. So let's name what some of the feelings are that go with that. And I really like this quote about youth work, that youth work is about, with young people, and you can apply this to community development, by the way, as well, which is doing life as it is lived. So you are enabling young people to reflect upon life as they are living it, literally kind of in the moment, like in time and space as they find it. And again, that's both a joy and a challenge to do. So it takes place where young people are at, both geographically and developmentally. A book that I can recommend to you is from a good friend of mine, Richard Passmore, who wrote a book years and years and years ago called Meet Them Where They're At, which is all about the detached youth work process. He was running detached youth work in Cheltenham at the time that he wrote that book. He's now missional advisor to the Bishop of Carlisle. I think that's his job title. So that's a book that I can recommend. And he talks a lot about this idea of you encounter young people where they are, like I say, both geographically, which is something that we've just talked about, but also developmentally. Where they're at in terms of their stage of life, where they're at in terms of their adolescent development, where they're at in terms of their identity development, where they're at in terms of their ability to think cognitively about things, where they're at behaviorally. You have to encounter young people with kind of where they are. So if you encounter a group of 18-year-olds, that's often very different to encountering a group of 12-year-olds. If you're encountering a mixed group of young people, then you'll get a mixed bag of all of that stuff. Some of this is just like what you encounter in youth work generally, but in particular, because detached youth work is about that encounter and that relationship building with perhaps not a lot else around it, you have to be even more attentive to these things. It operates without the use of a building, an activity, or any other provision that's primarily intended for the use of young people. So you can do detached youth work around, you might take some sport equipment out, for example, do you know what I mean? Or radio controlled cars for a while were the kind of fad, do you know what I mean, that youth workers used to take out to detached youth work as a way of kind of connecting with young people. So it doesn't mean you can't do any activity. A good one is actually just taking out a thermos and offering them a drink. You know, there's lots of little practical things, do you know what I mean, that you can, do you know what I mean, that you can do. But the primary focus isn't actually about doing an activity. It's about getting to know those young people and building a relationship with them. And as we've already talked about, it happens in spaces which young people might identify as their own ground. And that's a really important thing to think about, which is it's youth work on their territory. So if they come into your youth club, I don't know, if you've got a church hall that you run a youth club in, for example, in essence, those young people are coming onto your turf, like your boundaries, your rules, and you have to negotiate those things with those young people. But in essence, you're in charge ultimately. Hopefully you do it in a really participative way, etc. But ultimately you are responsible for that space. The opposite is true if you do detached youth work, is you are being a guest in someone else's space. It's not a space they own. Obviously they don't own the park or own the bus shelter or own the supermarket or whatever they own, the street corner. But in terms of how they feel about it, they will feel like this is our place, this is where we hang out, and you are kind of like a guest in our space. That's how they'll kind of feel about it. So I hope already you're beginning to see that the psychology, if you like, of how this youth work is done is very different in many ways, because it's completely different being a guest than being a host. Even though the way you do the youth work should still be welcoming, inclusive, participatory, all those things that youth work should be, it is a different mentality when you are asking permission to be in someone else's space. And maybe you can think of things in your own life where, what is it like to host people and what is it like to be a guest in someone else's space? You know, how does that feel? Might even simply be, what's it feel like to go to your own church and what does it feel like to go to someone else's? Like if you go to someone else's, you have to learn the kind of ins and outs, the little rules, the do's and don'ts, don't you? The things that are left unsaid, but the things that are just done a little bit differently. And it's not that those people aren't welcoming and inclusive to you, is it? It's just that they have their way of doing things, right? If someone comes to your church, they kind of have to learn that, don't they? They have to learn about the way that you do things. So maybe that's an example of how you could think about it, about what is it like to go to someone else's church? Maybe just do it. Like, go to someone else's church and see how that feels. And then you can get a sense of what it's like to go into someone else's space. Does that all make sense so far? I'll stop there for a second. And any comments or questions on that part of things?
No questions.
Yes.
A slight observation is that we have young people who like to come into our churchyard.
Yep.
And I don't know, is it how to manage that space?
Yes, that's a really good question. Actually, that is quite common. Actually, I spoke to a few people where that is one of the reasons they start doing youth work is because young people come into things like their graveyards. So I've known churches where, in fact, actually a church I was involved in Cambridge, they started an open youth club because young people were coming and sitting underneath the overhang of the doorway because it was, you could get a little bit out of the rain. And then they decided to open a youth club to say, let's open the building. I would say that's kind of contested space where you're trying to work with young people to kind of negotiate. Yeah, it's like a negotiation about how should we approach the use of this space. I mean, obviously it depends on whether as a church you're willing to have young people in the graveyard like at all. Obviously, if you're trying to ban them, that's a different kettle of fish. But if you're wanting to have a conversation with young people about the use of that space, how do you respect this space, but how do we engage you, then that's a contested, negotiated kind of process, I would suggest, with those young people. So it's a good question. It's a good, where it's, like I say, contested space, that idea of those things. Cool. So just so we're clear what it's not, there's nothing wrong with outreach work, but detached youth work is not outreach work. So outreach work is where maybe you're running a youth club and you want to get a few more young people involved in that youth club. And so you might go out onto the streets and kind of have a conversation with some young people and say, oh, like on Friday nights, we run this youth club. Why don't you come in? Do you know what I mean? It'd be really good for you. Do you know what I mean? Et cetera, et cetera. So kind of pure detached work is not outreach work. There are obviously, you can use a detached model of outreach to engage new young people into what you want to do. But detached youth work in itself is about engaging with young people on their own terms. It's not about having another agenda to that terminology. It's not about policing hard to reach or disaffected young people. I have to do lots of work in my job over the years with the police and with local councillors and those kind of things. And if you talk to them about detached youth work, often what they'll want you to do is they say, we're really worried. We're getting lots of reports about these young people being naughty, hanging around where we don't want them to hang around. Can you do some youth work to do something about them? And then what you end up is you end up pretending that you're the behaviour police, like that set of expectations. And it's not about that. That's not what you're trying to do. It can be tricky if you do things like take money off the police and stuff for doing stuff, but you've got to talk about what the terms of trade are. So here in Birmingham, I do some work with the Community Safety Partnership, and that, which obviously includes police, council, etc. And we talk about the value of the youth work process, that we're not there to deal with the fact that some people feel unsafe walking through the local park because there's teenagers there. That doesn't mean you're condoning young people's behaviour, but it means that you're not going there for that reason. You're going there because you genuinely want to get to know these young people. As soon as it's something else, young people will sniff that a mile away. You don't pass the sniff test. The sniff test for young people is always really important. Why are you doing this? Which also makes evangelism like a tricky thing to think about, isn't it? Because if young people think that you're there only because you're interested about whether they'll end up eventually being a Christian or in church on a Sunday, if you're talking about young people out in the community, they'll sniff that a mile away. If they think you're genuinely interested in them for genuine reasons, then faith will become part of the conversation as you go, because that's just a more natural way of doing life together, isn't it? You share the things that are important to you. So just a thought about that. And it's not about social control. So you're not there to kind of make them good citizens, all that kind of, why don't you teach these young people to stop smoking, all that kind of stuff. Smoking cessation might be part of the process that you end up with, because that might be a natural part of the way that you work with them, where you start talking about those kind of things and exploring those kind of issues. But if you're there to control them, they'll spot that a mile away. And then it's not a youth work relationship. You might as well be a police officer if you're going to do that. Do you know what I mean? Rather than a youth worker. A youth worker has a particular role in the lives of young people. And in the Christian community, there's obviously lots of examples now, street pastors, chaplaincy, etc. And it's not those things either, although those things are really valuable and good. So hopefully you're getting a sense that detached youth work is a particular way of working with young people, a particular kind of approach to working with young people that I think is really can be really effective and really, and really good. But it can get misconstrued, like lots of these things can, into being something that it's not quite, and then you lose the effectiveness of it because it turns into something that's not quite. So I've talked for a little bit, so I'm going to give you a little exercise to do for a couple of minutes, if that's all right. So I want you to think about planning like an afternoon out, a night out, like with your friends. This afternoon out, evening out has to be at least for 3 hours. You're not allowed to spend more than a £5 collectively. You're not allowed to meet in your homes. You can only go places where under 16s are allowed, and you can only use transport that an under 16 can use. Okay? So have a bit of a think and think, what would you do with your time? I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about it. Think what you would do. And then let's see what you've come up with. So I'd say just give you another minute or two, it's only a bit of fun exercise, just to put us in the minds of what it's like to be a teenager trying to do stuff with your friends. So don't over like it's not a test, but have a bit of a think about what you would do. And then whenever you've thought about it, feel free to stick it in the chat, perhaps. Then we can see what you've been thinking. Let's see what people come up with. Cool. So if you've had a bit of a think, stick it in the chat. See what you've let's see what you've come up with. Like I say, it's not a test, so don't worry about it. Walk, bike rides, get some chips or ice cream. Excellent. Yeah. Chocolate or alcohol. Big public building, free Wi-Fi, exit, big porch, and hopefully someone has a mobile, make TikTok videos. Fantastic. Excellent. Excellent. Becky, I might come for an evening out with you. That sounds really good fun. Although I'm a bit of an ice cream fiend, my family will tell you. So Sean also is appealing to me in terms of like the ice cream stuff. Anyone else got some thoughts about what you would do? Cycle, walk, bus ride to the beach, bonfire. Excellent. With s'mores. Excellent. Yeah. Yep. Let's just see if anyone else any more, and then we'll one of the things that's interesting, isn't it, is about how other people will perceive what it is that you're, do you know what I mean? What it is that you're doing. If you do a bonfire on the beach, when I was at university at Swansea, actually, we used to have bonfires on the beach. Like that was one of the things we did. It was great. Or walk down to Mumbles and do that. It was always fantastic place to do stuff. So, but if you're hanging around in a public, so Becky's like hanging around in a public building, like using the Wi-Fi, not really spending very much money, Do you know what I mean? Like up with your phone up here and all that kind of stuff and doing the kind of silly stuff. Like other people are likely to get pretty annoyed potentially with all of that, right? No beaches in Derby. That's why you've got to go and hang out in a building. So it's interesting, isn't it, to think about what are the resources actually that are around that young people can, like a beach is a really good natural resource, isn't it, for young people? But if you live in Derby, you haven't got access to those, do you know what I mean, to those things. So there are some spaces, aren't they, that are seemed in one sense more socially acceptable, where you can keep yourself separate from other people, do you know what I mean, etc. So then you've got lots of parks potentially, like in Derby, and so you've got people, young people who may well spend lots of time hanging around in the park. Let me just do my next slide, and then we can have a conversation about it. So just have a like now. I know we've been in lockdown, so it might be that your last fun night out was a while ago. But how does what you might do if you were under 16 compare to what you as an adult might naturally do? Like, what do you think you might enjoy about what young people do? What do you think you might frustrate in? What problems? How do you think other people view it? All those kind of questions. Give me a bit of feedback about the difference of being what you're able to do as an adult and what you're able to do as a kind of under 16, you know, as a teenager. Like, how do you feel about all of that? I'm not trying to push you in a particular direction. I'm just interested about what you think. So again, stick it in the chat and let's see what people make of it.
I think you're perceived differently.
Yeah.
Personally, I mean, you know, I still do things like go for a walk with my friends, but people would never question what I was doing in the same way that if it was a gang of kids in hoodies, you know, or, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So how people respond to you, react to you. So Sean, go like, you know, how does that, if you're, you know, 14, 15, 16, whatever, like, how does that, what's the difference in that feeling? What's the, what effect does that have on you? The difference that how people perceive what it is that you're up to?
You know, now I would feel a little more relaxed about just getting with it, because I don't, you know, I'm at, you know, it doesn't matter what other people think to a certain extent. But, you know, when you're 14, 15, 16 and people are giving you sideways glances and things, it must be really frustrating and also a little bit disheartening, I would have thought as well, that people will automatically jump to that conclusion.
Yeah.
Especially if you are, you know, just hanging out with your friends, you're not causing any trouble or anything like that. The fact that you're being seen in that way, even though you're not really doing anything to harm anyone, I can't imagine that's a very nice feeling at all.
Yeah. Yeah. So that sets you up, doesn't it, for I'm stereotyped in this particular way, I'm seen in this way. And what happens when we're stereotyped in a particular way is often we just go, well, if you're going to think of me like that, then that's kind of what I'm going to do. Because if you're going to think I'm up to no good, well, I might as well get up to no good then. I might as well have a bit more fun, because like that's what you're going to think of me like anyway. And so it's very easy, isn't it, for young people to feel really alienated, isn't it, from the adult world, from adults feeling that they care for them. And hopefully you're beginning to kind of go, but what could detached youth workers do? Maybe actually we could say something different to young people about how they're valued, and at least what we think of them, and that we understand the social spaces that they're inhabiting and why they're inhabiting those social spaces, because often there literally is nowhere else to go. There's nothing else to do. And of course, young people get up to all kinds of like things that make them laugh and make them have fun. Doesn't mean they're necessarily trying to be trouble, but it can, for other adults, they can get that whole perception going on. And clothing, I think, Jean, was the other thing you interestingly said, that you're not dressed like the rest of us, and we have this image that, you know, if you've got a hoodie on, that you must be about to try and, you know, rob the local supermarket or something, or, you know, mug the nearest old lady, or whatever it is that you think you're up to, when actually for 99% of young people that's just simply what they wear, isn't it? It's just, there's a real disconnect, isn't there, often between young people and adults, especially in those kind of public spaces. So how public spaces and public discourse happen And that's an interesting thing for you to think about in terms of the graveyard like question, isn't it? Like, are those young people looked at with, you know, suspicion, sneers, like distance, you know, assumptions that they must be up to no good, and young people are kind of feeding off that and seeing that? Or are those young people kind of seeing, oh, do you know what, the church in its widest sense in terms of its space is a place where we're welcome? Yes, there might be some boundaries to it, but actually people want to say hello to us and people want to connect with us. Do you see what I mean? The difference for how that feels for young people is actually quite big, isn't it? So does that help? Does that, like, hopefully that exercise got you thinking about, it's so different being a teenager in public spaces than being an adult in public spaces. What you can do with your time and your money is very different to what you can do like as an adult. And the assumptions that adults make about what young people are up to, like, is one of the most troubling things, I think. Okay, good. Hopefully that's got you thinking, like, a little bit. Like I say, keep sticking stuff in the chat or speaking if you want to, if you've got questions or queries and stuff. But just to think a little bit about whether detached youth work is missional, since we're on a Christian conference, and people obviously have, when I say the word mission, people have different ideas about what that means. I appreciate that is, and people have different perceptions about what youth work is. But I wanted just to quickly read to you a few verses from Luke 10. In fact, I'm going to skip the thing back so that you can't see the answers that I gave. So just, I'll read it maybe a couple of times. What did you notice about this passage? What might this passage say to us about engaging with people on their own terms and on their own turf, do you know what I mean, etc.? What might this passage say? So Jesus appointed 70 others and sent them ahead of him in pairs to every town and place where he himself intended to go. He said to them, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. Go on your way. See, I am sending you out like lambs into the midst of wolves. Carry no purse, no bag, no sandals, and greet no one on the road. Whatever house you enter, first say peace to this house. And if anyone is there who shares in peace, your peace will rest on that person. But if not, it will return to you. Remain in the same house, eating and drinking whatever they provide, for the labourer deserves to be paid. And then he carries on about curing the sick, like, etc., etc., etc. So I'll read it again. After this, Jesus appointed 70 others and sent them ahead of them in pairs to every town and place where he himself intended to go. He said to them, the harvest is plentiful, but the labourers are few. Therefore ask the Lord of the harvest to send out labourers into his harvest. Go on your way. See, I am sending you out like lambs into the midst of wolves. Carry no purse, no bag, no sandals, and greet no one on the road. Whatever house you enter, first say peace to this house. And if anyone is there who shares in peace, your peace will rest on that person. But if not, it will return to you. Remain in the same house, eating and drinking whatever they provide, for the labourer deserves to be paid. Whenever you enter a town and its people welcome you, eat what is set before you, cure the sick who are there, and say to them, the kingdom of God has come near to you. But whenever you enter a town and they do not welcome you, go out into the streets and say, even the dust of that town clings to your feet. We wipe off in protest against you. Yet know this kingdom of God has come near. What are the things that might strike you in terms of what we're talking about today about that passage? Stick a few thoughts like in the chat or feel free to unmute and speak. What struck you about those things?
He sent them out 2 by 2.
Yeah. To actually go out in small groups, which is actually, I'm not claiming, by the way, I'm not, you know what, I think people do this with Jesus far too often, don't they? They apply a modern kind of way of thinking into Jesus and say, oh, Jesus was the best management guru ever, and then he was the best this ever. I'm not claiming that Jesus was going, this is detached youth work, but there are maybe some principles, like you say. So going out 2 by 2, so not going on your own, but not going out in a big group. That's a good thought process. Yeah. So 2 by 2. Yeah. Which does apply to detached youth work, about not going out on your own, but not going out in droves either. Anything else that struck you?
Something about not carrying very much,
Excellent.
being lightweight with what you have.
Yes, excellent. So using what you have, absolutely. And what you have, what these disciples had was themselves. They didn't have gifts to offer. They didn't have activities to bring out of their bag. What they had was who they were. And that's a big part of detached youth work. Of course, you can take like radio control cars, whatever you want to do, drinks, whatever. But the main thing that you bring is yourself. And in one sense, that was both scary for the disciples, but also liberating, that they didn't have to pull off any kind of amazing, strategic, big kind of thought process. They just had to go as who they were. And that Jesus trusted them with who they were. Great. So that's a really important one. Absolutely. In youth clubs and stuff, we often have many tricks up our sleeve that we can use if things are not working well. In detached youth work, you don't have the same tricks. You have your own relational skills. So, yeah, very good. That's a very good one. Anything else that struck people?
Sounds like we're sending them out to meet people at their level.
Yeah.
So by offering peace and saying, look, if they don't want it, then move on. Brilliant.
Sean, that's brilliant. Absolutely perfect. That this idea of a person of peace is really important to detached youth work, like actually. And that actually, if a group of young people don't want to know, are not interested, you can't force yourself on them. You have to literally shake the, you might literally have to shake the dust off your feet or the sand out your shoes or wherever it is that you are. If you're wandering the beaches in Swansea, you might literally be the sand out your shoes. Yes, so the onus is on the recipient to decide how they respond to your offer. And that is absolutely true of detached youth work. How young people choose to respond, you cannot force yourself over the top of that. Youth work is about voluntary participation, right? It's about young people wanting to be engaged with you, even if you take the first initiative, like even if you offer something initially to them. And so that's a really important point. And this thing about a person of peace is also really important. Who might a person of, in a group of young people, who might your person of peace be, do you think? Like, what kind of young person acts in that way? How might they respond to you? Oh, I've got you stumped now. So I'll help. Let me do this slide actually as well. So so a person of peace. So take nothing except yourself. First point. Somebody said that. Brilliant. Find a person of peace. A person of peace is someone who basically is the gateway to everybody else. So when it says go to a town and find the person of peace, what that means is the person who welcomes you initially and says to everybody else, this person is all right. Let's hear them out. Let's welcome them. So in a group of young people, you might have some young people who don't want to talk to you. Some young people are actually just quite shy, but you might have one or two young people who go, oh no, that's like, let's stay and chat. No, that's all right. And then might call some other young people over and go, oh, come and talk to Tim. He's saying he can support us. Like, let's come and have a conversation with him. Do you see what I mean? Like, a person of peace is that person who resonates with what it is that you're bringing. So a person of peace that you are to a person of peace that they are. And interestingly, that person of peace that Jesus is talking about is not a fellow Christian, like, or not a fellow believer necessarily. Do you know what I mean? They're just somebody who instinctively sees something in you that they resonate with. And so when you work with young people, finding that person of peace, that young person who connects with you and then will connect you with everybody else, actually, whatever kind of youth work you're doing is actually a really good way of thinking about things. So even though this is 2000 odd years ago, like, actually that whole thinking still applies. Often I think that's a young person that God is doing something with, actually, and you learn to spot the young person that God is doing something with, and then that young person can help God do things with their peer group. So that's a way to missionally to think about it. So just a few thoughts then. Take nothing except yourself. Find a person of peace. Interestingly, Jesus talks all the time about accepting hospitality. One of the great, you know, when you're getting somewhere with a group of young people is when they want to share something with you. Do you know what I mean? Like, we've got a spare can of Coke, we've got some sweets, we've got this. Do you know what I mean? Like, would you like something? Those little things, it sounds really trivial, but actually you accepting that offer from young people is actually really important to them. Do you know what I mean? Because it's their first go at trying to find that connecting like piece. But accepting hospitality is bigger than just whether they offer you anything. It's accepting being in their space. So hospitality is about go to dinner with other people. That's what Jesus is talking. No, if someone invites you for food, go and have food with them. If young people invite you into their space, accept the offer. So accept the offer of hospitality. Do you know what I mean? Don't hold yourself from that. Discover and proclaim the nearness of the kingdom of God. I think that's about saying God is at work, like here. God, like, and our job is to spot it and work with it. We might proclaim it, as in we might say something to young people about that. If we, I mean, it depends on your theology of what you think the kingdom of God is. So I don't want to get into all of that. But if the kingdom of God is something about love, friendship, generosity, compassion, etc., wherever you see that in a group of young people, that is proclaiming that the kingdom of God is near. And so you can help young people see that the kingdom of God is near to them, whether you actually physically say that to them or whether just in the way you act. It's understanding that the kingdom of God is near. And what was really interesting in the passage is that the kingdom of God is near, even if that group of people reject you. You still can say the kingdom of God was near. So the kingdom of God is near to everyone. It's just about our response to it. And the final thing they do, which is the bit I didn't read, is they come back and they say to Jesus, even the demons obeyed us. So like they come back amazed at what God can do with them when they went with nothing. So they went with nothing to these towns that they didn't know, with people that they didn't know, and they came back amazed at what God had done. And I think that's the missional kind of imperative that detached youth work can give you, which is you can go just with yourself, you know, you as people, and somehow discover that God is up to something and come back into your church and go, do you know what? God's at work out there, like with people. Isn't that amazing? Like, that's why it's exciting. That's why I love mission stuff, because you get to join in with whatever God is up to in the world. Does that all make some sense in terms of like a way that you could think about this? Maybe even explain it to your church about why detached youth work can work, because you can put it in that kind of missional, do you know what I mean, kind of language. So just some of the benefits and challenges, just making sure I'm notorious for like just making sure I keep to time. So and I want to make sure I do the practical things with you. So the benefits and the challenges, we've talked about this. It's their turf, like it's their patch. You're starting like with them and where they are, which makes it the right place. Oops. All right, working. You haven't got to worry about a building. You haven't got to worry about damage. You haven't got to worry about any of those kind of, you know, clearing up after yourself, all that kind of stuff. Like, you don't have to worry about those things. I like this, that there's a more equal kind of power dynamic because you're in their turf, being invited by them. And of course, you're still an adult, but you lessen the power differential between you as an adult and them as young people. You're there as a guest, like seeing what their hospitality kind of looks. Oops. So that's a few kind of initial kind of thoughts. And then kind of continuing that whole thought process. One, it's all about relationships. So detached youth work is all about building relationships with young people. It's not about much else. Like it's about getting to know young people, building those trusting, deep kind of relationships kind of with them. That young people are not consumers or service users. You know, you haven't got like a piece of provision, if you like, to offer to them. And so you're not having that kind of, I'm only here because you're offering me something other than yourself. Do you see what I mean? Like there's nothing else kind of there. You're not there because you're offering them a mental health service or a unemployment service, or you're not there with those kind of things. You're simply there to get to know them and to know them as people, which then stops young people acting as kind of, like say, consumers of things. Detached youth work does demand time, as in overtime. Like I wouldn't start it unless you're able to sustain it over a period of time. Young people can feel very let down by adults if they come in short bursts for them, and it's a slow process. Getting to know young people is a slow process, etc. So you have to set this up in a way that means you're committed, like, to it. There's about genuine relationships that have some mutuality to it, that you're giving something of yourself, but also that young people are giving something to you. I love hanging out with young people, even though I'm an old geezer now, because I find that young people offer so much to me. They broaden my understanding of life. They remind me that life can be exciting and interesting. They are at that kind of inquisitive time of life, and so they're kind of wondering about the world, and that reminds me to wonder about the world. So I love all that kind of stuff, like with young people. But here's some of the challenges are that the risk is on our side. Like, what if young people reject us? What if they don't want to know us? All that kind of stuff. That for some people, it can be scary to make the first move and go into unfamiliar territory. It is genuinely cross-cultural mission stuff, right? It's detached youth work. Is you're going into someone else's territory. When I was at university in Swansea, we went up to the Bonham estate in particular. I'd never been there before. I'd never really been to a council estate before. Do you know what I mean? I've not encountered young people from a very different kind of context to my upbringing. Do you know, myself, at one level, that was quite nerve-wracking. Do you know what I mean? To do that, because you've got to kind of understand that you're on their terms and all that kind of stuff. That you know, you've got this group of young people kind of hanging around, and what you're doing is not a normative kind of process. It's about voluntary relationships, which are constantly up for negotiation. So will they welcome you again next week? Do they want that kind of relationship with you? Where's that relationship kind of got to? That you're constantly thinking about how to maintain acceptance from those young people. Do they continue to want you to be in their lives and to be around them? So those things can be some of the challenges. You might have some other ones that are a bit of like fears, but it's generally that kind of, here's groups of young people hanging around in their own space, doing their own thing, interacting with each other in the way that they want to, and you are having to go and be a guest in that space, on that territory, and you have to understand that culture and that territory that you are going to go inhabit with integrity, being true to yourself. But that's the challenge of detached youth work, as opposed to, like I say, a youth club, for example, where it's young people who have to do some of the adjusting. Like, normally young people won't want to make any adjustments until they've got to know you a little bit. Then they might be willing to, but you have to do the first steps, like with all of that stuff. So just some things to think about as you get started. So for those people who are, even if you've done it before, actually, just thinking about what you need to. So first of all, make sure you put the right structures in place. So maybe do some training, get somebody in to do some training for you as a team. Who's going to kind of oversee what it is that you're doing, provide some accountability, you know, help you think about what you've done and why you've done it, and what went well and what went less well, were there any safeguarding issues, etc. Make sure you've got the right policies and procedures, like lone working policies and safeguarding policies and health and safety policies and all that kind of stuff. And that you have a way of recording. So how do you record what happened? In Worth, we just use, like, we have some recording sheets that we use that we upload onto a computer system, because we're a size organisation, have to do that. But you know, your recording sheet might simply be, when did you go out, what times, where did you go, how many young people did you meet, and maybe some thoughts about what happened in that, you know, record a bit of the interaction. You know, we stayed around for 20 minutes, we chatted to 10 young people, we talked about football in the park. They agreed that we could come back again and see them same time, same place next week. Do a bit of study in the community, like what's out there. So what else is around where you are, and map out in particular what that area is like for young people, what's available, do you know what I mean, for them. And then the big bit is to do a period of observation. So actually just go and observe different times of the day, different places. Where do young people hang out? How often? In what kind of groups do they hang out? Get a sense of kind of what is going on. That will help you plan your detached youth work, but also think about who you're engaging with. So a group of 12 to 14-year-olds hang around in this park after school for a couple of hours oh, right, okay, so is that a group of young people that we want to work with? Oh, at 7 o'clock at night, there's a group of 16 to 18-year-olds who mixed gender who hang around outside the supermarket. Do we want to engage with those young people and what's going on for them? Do you see what I mean? That observational, just kind of working out what's going on. So a bit of community mapping and a bit of observation to get started. And then in one sense, it's a natural process of getting to know young people. So, you know, like you would if you're getting to know somebody, you don't go rushing up to somebody new, do you, and tell your life story to them and say, I want to be your friend forever. Like, do you? That's not how you do things. And so with young people, it's entirely the same thing, which is you might spend a few weeks just kind of walking up, saying hello. You might have some ID on you, in which case they might ask you about that. Find ways to break the ice. Hi, I'm Tim. I've actually just started doing youth work like in this local community, and I'm trying to find out what young people are up to like here. That might start a conversation like with some young people. What's it like around here? Always leave on a positive from those things. Don't drag it out. You know, if you go to I don't know, if you go to dinner with a dinner party or a party or some, you know, a social event, and someone starts talking to you and they go on too long, and you're left there thinking, I wish this person would just shut up. Do you know what I mean? And leave. How can I make an excuse to leave them? What you don't want is young people feeling that. Do you know what I mean? That there's like, it's fine just to sit and stay and chat for 2 minutes if that's what it takes to get to know them. And then there's a few. So that's the contact kind of stage. There's kind of a couple other stages. So I've just described the first stage. The second stage is like just beginning to make some progress. Tell me, you know, we're getting to know each other. Like, let's talk a little bit about how you see things and what's going on for you. And, you know, that can be a conversation about anything, football, life, God, school. Do you know what I mean? It might well be anything, but, you know, just getting in conversations with some of those young people. And then, I have to get my cursor to work properly. The risk part of it, and when I say risk, I don't mean that as in you're putting yourself at risk, but is then to move the process. You know, if you've got to really know these young people, is to move the process on. Why can't we do these things? Why don't you give that a go? Yes, I think both this session is being recorded, which will include the slides, I think. So that's what's going on. But also you can email me if you want, Sean. Do you know what I mean? So whilst I'm talking, I'll put my email in the chat, and then you can email me as well if you want. I've done lots of other youth work stuff as well, Sean. So if there's anything else I can help you with, like, let me know. So all I'm saying is that you know, I can't tell you exactly how long each stage takes and how to do that, because that's dependent on your relationship with these young people. I'm just saying it's a developmental journey where relationships deepen like over time, and don't be afraid of the pace of that process, where you can grow and develop with these young people and help them kind of grow and develop with their relationship with you and what you talk about, and you can deepen that process like with them as you go. Does that make sense in terms of like a bit of a process to think about? Just think about it as the process of building a friendship. You're not there to be their friend, you're there to befriend them. But just think about it like you would building a friendship with anybody else. You know, that it goes slowly, it takes time. Some friendships go quicker than others. Some people you get to know better and quicker than others. Some people you have connecting points with quite quickly in life, and some people take a bit longer, don't they? Well, that's no different to working with young people. You know, there might be some young people you really click with, some young people you take longer to get to know, some young people in a group where you get to know some of them really well, and others in the group seem to hang around the edge, not really talk to you. That's all right. That's all okay. I mean, that's all part of the process. Even back in the day when I was in like at Swansea and I didn't know what the heck I was doing, I could tell you 4 or 5 young people I got to know really well through that, going up to Bonnymine, and some that I didn't. So that's all very natural. So let me just, don't leave me. Let me, we've only got 2 minutes left. So just to say quickly what you need. So self-awareness, what's going on for you, being in control of your own kind of emotions, what's going on around you in terms of the environment, kind of intentionally wanting to communicate with people, intentionally wanting to build relationships. We've talked about negotiation, it's fine to challenge young people when you get to know them a little bit more about some of their attitudes or some of the ways they talk or some of the things they think about. That's okay. You can do that in the context of a good like relationship with young people. But the last few points are about, it is a responsive, flexible thing. You have to respond to the relationship as it is, the conversation as it goes. You have to go with the flow like of conversation and stuff. So it's quite a responsive, flexible kind of approach to relational approach to youth work. Is that all right? Does that make sense in terms of like some of the qualities that you and your team? So think about if you're building a detached youth work team, what kind of qualities that you want them to have. It's not for everybody. I know people who are brilliant youth workers who hate detached youth work with a passion. Do you know what I mean? So it's not for everybody. Some people have an aptitude for it and some don't. And then I wanted to finish, to say there's some other ways that you can think about things. Like we use, this is some of our work. That's a community allotment we use. We have a mobile youth venue. So we have a bus, do you know what I mean, that we use. So there are other ways in which you can do like this work other than just walking on the streets. Like there are other ways that you can engage young people with where they are. And I wanted, ignore that slide because that was for, I wanted to finish with this quote in the last 10 seconds. There you go, a quote to finish with about going on a journey with young people together. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that was something